My whole life, I've been told that I live in a patriarchy, that men dominate the world and that it's worse for women than it is for men. Now, obviously, that made sense when I was younger. Most of the prime ministers and presidents, and certainly the way that the major religions operated, seemed to promote male interests, or at least the empowerment of men above the other gender. But as I grew older, it didn't start to make sense anymore. I was a man. Why didn't doors open easily for me? Why was it competitive? And when the men's right crowd started making arguments such as men live shorter lives, we go to war, we get conscripted, we go to prison more, we pay less, we get less welfare, pay more tax, we don't go so well in divorce courts, paternity fraud, and many other arguments they made, I started to think about it. Is it true? And I've thought about it a lot now. At 44 years of age, I believe I have the answer. And the answer is simply that it is a lie. We have been lied to, and a lot of damage is done on the back of this lie. That it isn't simply the case that the genders were equal until men broke the truce and struck down the other gender and made oppressive laws that kept women down, which is unfairness. The truth is that 1 million years ago, we were a matriarchy. It's women that changed the way the world works. It's women that created the social laws and the social structures. If you watch the rest of this video, I can explain.
It's where the most beautiful girls get asked by the worst dudes to prom, and they're like, yeah, because they finally found someone that likes them. Why is every pretty girl with a horrible looking man? I don't understand. Listen, I'm not shaming people for their looks, but I am though. You give an ugly guy a chance, he thinks he rules the world.
So let us start with the science. Most people believe science. Your body is made up of cells. Your cells have lots of things in them, cytoplasm, ribosomes, mitochondria, but it has a nucleus. And inside that nucleus is DNA. That DNA gets called autosomal DNA. And when the sperm hits the egg and a baby gets made, it breaks apart, moves, bits break off, a new piece of DNA is created, and the baby has its own DNA from mum and dad. In all male babies, there is a Y chromosome, and they get their Y chromosome 100% from their father. Their mother doesn't have one to give them. There's only one Y chromosome in my male lineage, and it's all the same, plus or minus some small mutations. But there's another example of this. Outside of your nucleus, you have mitochondria in your cell. At some point in time, 100 million years ago, that mitochondria developed some DNA somehow. Now in the sperm, all the mitochondria is in the tail of the sperm. And so, when the sperm hits the egg, there's this big chemical reaction. Almost all the sperm gets wiped out, so only the nucleus makes it through to make the new baby. And so 100% of the mitochondria and the mitochondria DNA in the new baby comes only from the ovum, from the mother. And so if you take a shipwreck and an island, and 10 men and 10 women swim ashore, and 9 of the men are just disgusting and gross, and the women can't stand them, and they're impotent, they're not interested in sex anyway, and they run and hide on the other side of the island. And one guy gets all 10 women pregnant over, say, 2 years, and each female has a son. When the rescue party comes and they say, wow, look at this, there's 10 babies or 10 little boys running around the island. If they were to DNA test these little boys, they would find the same Y chromosome in all of them, that one lucky guy that got the 10 wives. But you would find different mitochondrial DNA in all the boys, assuming their mothers weren't sisters or cousins or something like that. Now take a different shipwreck on a different island. Again, 10 men and 10 women swim ashore, but this time they observe the laws of Christianity or whatever, and each man marries the woman and they each produce a child that is their own. Again, when the rescue party turns up 2 years later, if you tested the DNA of, let's say they're all male children, you would find a different Y chromosome in each boy and different mitochondrial DNA in each boy. So the human population, the science has been done, 23andMe reigns supreme, and all the science in the labs has produced an outcome, and we are like, surprisingly, Island 1. We have many more mothers than fathers in our history. Most men haven't mated. So the Earth is like that island, and those 9 men that ran and hid on the other side of the island didn't get anywhere. We have that in our population. In fact, if you're very careful in how you observe, we have it now. But for the last 1 million years, since we split away from chimpanzees, most of the men in all cultures, on all islands, in all populations, in all migrations of humans across the globe, most men did not mate. One guy got heaps of women pregnant, and most guys got 0 women pregnant. The science is hard. There's nothing you can do about it. It's irrefutable. The only question is, why? The question of why is not that hard because there are other species and we can observe them. Our movies and our culture and our music may be affecting the way we think, but it's not affecting the way lobsters and chimpanzees and dogs and cats and horses behave and the way they mate. So we can just observe them. And mostly, most mammals and birds fall into one of two broad categories. The smaller of the broad category is those animals where one male becomes extremely dominant, horns or antlers or tusks or something, fights all the other males, beats them up, claims a territory and says everyone in this territory is subject to me and my violence, my dominance or my leadership. And the females in there, whether they like it or not, they submit to the power and they all mate with the one male because he's huge. But to do that, the guy has to be huge. He has to have those antlers or those horns or those poisonous spurs or whatever it is that he has. That means that all his kids will have antlers too, and then they'll fight amongst themselves, and the ones with the biggest antlers will have all the babies again, and you'll get even bigger antlers for the next generation until you have things like the difference between a buck and a doe, and you can always see these animals and birds very easily. The males are vastly different to the females. Now, the sorts of animals that have, well, mammals and birds that have those sorts of mating systems constitute, as I understand it, about 7%. So which are we? Now, I don't want to be sick or gross on this, but this is just a good way of explaining to us. If you ever see, say, 100 people, 50 men, 50 women walk out of a concentration camp, and they're all emaciated with shaved heads and things, there's not that much difference between men and women, actually. In fact, our sexual dimorphism factor is very small, 1.13. Gorillas are like 1.8, orangutan, so 1.8. Gorillas are like 2, a factor of 2. We're only 1.13. Even chimpanzees are bigger than us. So we have a very small sexual dimorphism. The big factors that differentiate men and women are beards. You're looking at one. You're also listening to one, our voice. Those are two factors. There are some others, and they are kind of important, but these are the big ones. Why is it, and I've wondered this my whole life, why is it that men have beards? Why is it that we have deep voices? Does that allow us to run through the jungle faster? Does that allow us to store fat for the winter? Don't women need to run fast and store fat for the winter? Why don't they have them if that's what they do? Ultimately, the answer is best illustrated to you by me giving you a list of traits. And your job now, because this is an interactive video, is to determine whether or not the list of traits I'm about to give you are A, evidence of a high testosterone rate, B, evidence of being an attractive male, or C, both of the above. Square head, wide jaw, strong jaw, shall we say, Adam's apple, broad shoulders, lots of muscle, quick mind, risk-taking, in control of your emotions. Sound familiar? It's C. Pretty much all high testosterone traits are the sort of things that would make a guy look as though he should be on the cover of a romance novel or something like that, like he should be like one of those heartthrob movie stars. And this is something, these beards and these deep voices have come along since we evolved from chimpanzees, or at least our common ancestors. Neither chimp males nor females have a beard, and the chimp male's voice is actually higher than the chimp female's. So this is a change that's unique to us, and thus it must be evolutionary. Something has selected for our deep voice and our beard. And I'm proposing to you that the reason is that the female found it attractive, and that's the other big group of mammals and birds that are the reason why the evolution takes place at all. We don't have the antlers, those guys that walked out of the concentration camp. All they were armed with was beards and deep voices to differentiate them from women. We don't have the claws or the tusks, but we do have a visual and an audible sign of a high testosterone trait. Something that the female might be able to say, I select him and not him. And we know the outcome because we are the outcome. We know they selected for beards and deep voices. They selected for high testosterone traits. Thus, males these days have high testosterone traits. One of those traits of having high testosterone is something like dominance or social dominance or maybe aggressiveness, certainly social confidence. It's that hard to define thing that you would call an alpha male. Women have been selecting for alpha males for a long time. In 2014, renowned geneticist Dr. Mark Stoneking set out to sample the male population of the Earth and test this theory about more mothers than fathers. He picked 651 samples from Aboriginal Australians, from people from Sweden, from sub-Saharan Africans to the Japanese, to everyone in between. And he found that uniformly across the whole population of his sample, that there was always more diversity between the Y chromosome and the mitochondrial DNA in the way that I said before. And so scientists that have come after Dr. Mark Stoneking have conducted tests after tests, and all of them have proved this to be true. In fact, we've got some hard stats on different migration rates around the world, which is important because Say the Aborigines in Australia, I mean, they crossed the sea 75,000 years ago or something and stayed on their own here in Australia. Thus, they couldn't be influenced by Christianity or Islam or whatever religious or ideals or thoughts persisted in the world pre them leaving. They were on their own, and still this idea of more mothers and fathers permeated, as separated as they were from the rest of the world. And this is true for every population that we've ever found. The European people diverging from Africans about 49,000 years ago, there were 8 mothers for about every 3.8 fathers. In Africa, where people stayed and didn't migrate at all, there were about 11.5 mothers for every 6.6 fathers. In Central Asia, migrating from Africa 37,000 years ago, there's about 29.5 mothers for every 8.6 fathers. In East Asia, again about 37,000 years after people left Africa, there's about 10 mothers for every 2.2 fathers. And in the Americas, diverging from Asia about 15,000 years ago, there's about 18 mothers for every 7 fathers. And in Oceania, where the Polynesian people live, diverging from Africa about 61,000 years ago, there's about 3.5 mothers for every 2.1 fathers. So in aggregate, there's about 154 mothers for every 43.8 fathers. In a nutshell, there have been about 3.5 times more mothers than fathers. And assuming all women became mothers, only 28.4% of males ever succeeded in producing offspring. The analysis showed something further though. The analysis showed that there was a certain bottleneck about 8,000 years ago. And that's important. That's when the Agrarian Revolution happened. So if one can imagine, if you were a man in that period of time where you could make a farm, would that make you more or less likely to capture a wife if you thought men were fighting with horns and tusks and antlers and things, or whatever our versions of that was? Now it's important because there were about 17 times more mothers and fathers at this point in time. And it is difficult to imagine, given that we know that the farmer won, why the farmer was so much better placed to range around the landscape and find the women that he wanted and declare a territory and chase them down. You would have thought the hunter-gatherer was much more well-placed to do that. However, indeed, with the theory that I'm propagating to you now, that it was the female that did the choosing. If you were a woman that knew that she was about to be pregnant 10 times in the next 15 years, would you choose to be barefoot and pregnant, tramping across the dangerous countryside, throwing sharp sticks at dangerous animals? Or would you rather settle down on a farm that had a chicken and a cow and a sheep and some grain in a pot and a bed? And I'd suggest to you that it was the reason there were 17 times more mothers and fathers in that particular period of time is because the females chose the farmer, thus the farmer won, and that's a very rational choice on the female's behalf. I can give further evidence of my theory. Many females of many species have what you would call a visible estrous cycle, something that would say, hey, right now I'm ovulating, whether it's the big bright red bum on the baboon or the mandrill or whatever it is, or it's a scent upon a dog or something else. If there is a case that you can look upon a female and say, well, she's ovulating right now, then you might think the choice would be for the male to choose to instigate sex right now because it's the best chance of getting some kids out of it. Our females have no visible estrous cycle. There are no women themselves know they can count forward the days at the very least. It would appear that the human species is populated by males that simply don't know whether this night time is the right time or not. Can't tell from their females whether if they sleep with them now, whether they'll get some kids out of it or not. However, the females, it seemed that they would always know. At the very least, they could count forward the days. One of the other sexual dimorphism factors that we have amongst humans is that our females are the only females that have mammaries the whole year round or breasts the whole year round. Most animals, they go away when they're not pregnant. Like you think of a cat or a dog or something like that. It doesn't always have like what you would call on a cow an udder, only when it's got kittens or pups. Our females have evolved to have them all year round, thus masking whether they're really pregnant or not. You can't look at a female always and see whether she is pregnant at this very moment. She can go months and you won't know, thus again implying that it wasn't for the males to do the selecting. In fact, they may be wasting their time with a woman that they were with to try and get some kids when she was never going to produce them anyway. But she would know. Ergo, the females did the choosing. And so, sometime after we have the Agrarian Revolution, we have the rise of what we might call the archaic states, or the beginning of civilization, whether it was Babylon or Egypt or the Greeks, or whatever you want to call it. Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar and the guys that were around at that point in time started to make codes of laws, and we remember them. They were written down on pillars in courtyards or on Dead Sea Scrolls or something or other, and we can read them. We can find out what people were thought were troubling at the time. So it certainly seemed as though those ancient people decided to make some laws that would say something like polygamy wasn't as good as you thought it was, and to try and introduce the concept of marriage, one man, one woman. So one woman would always have a husband and one husband would always have just one wife, so he didn't have to share his resources over many. So it would appear that men were promiscuous, which is no surprise to anyone. I mean, I could make the point that men are promiscuous, but that seems self-evident, and no one really wants to challenge that. But the ancients try to make an effort to curb that promiscuity amongst men, but also it seemed to take an effort to stop women choosing their own husbands, to have arranged marriages, and that her father or her mother or her priest or whoever would choose her husband for her. Now, why do it? If men were just looking for their own interest, surely we would make laws that say we would get as many wives as we possibly could, which seems to be the male prerogative. But for women, it seemed that there was some evil or something that we wanted to control in them choosing. Might it not be that they were trying to rid themselves of what I've described as basically polygamy? That is, if you leave it up to a female, she'd rather share a high-value man than have a low-value man all to herself. Exactly the sort of thing that would give us more mothers than fathers. And you can imagine from an ancient person's point of view, when you had a town that had like 5 guys that had 50 women, like Craster's Keep in Game of Thrones, that would be hard to defend, and that you would have all these sort of weird, creepy beta males wandering around in the desert, sad and lonely, and perhaps they'd form together to make a tribe and raid the city. However, if you had a city that every man had a wife, and then they had some kids, and then you had some family, and you had a house, a picket fence around it, and some meaning in your life, you as a man might stand and defend your city upon the wall to keep your family safe, so long as you had a family. You didn't have a family, why would you fight? And then after that, we have the religious teachings that things like Judaism and Christianity and lately Islam has taught us, which, with some exceptions in Islam, has tried as hard as they can to get rid of polygamy altogether. But again, maybe it was just arbitrary. Maybe it was just to make sure that rich old men could get whatever they want. But perhaps, like the rest of all of those books, they were trying to teach society how to live well, and that there was something about females choosing who their husbands were that was, for lack of a better word, evil. And what that might have been was that they were continuing this process of saying only dominant males get to have kids, and thus all kids are born to dominant men. And whether it's genetic or whether it's the way their fathers teach them to become, we have generation of young males becoming more and more and more dominant. And it would make sense when you look at the certain Christian teachings, such as the meek shall inherit the earth, that the Christians were trying to do something about male dominance. And Nietzsche's idea of ressentiment, of ripping the rug out from underneath of people like Achilles and King Leonidas, and making the pride and the strength and the rage and the wrath and the greed as being sins, and making the virtues of meekness and humility as being virtues. We then enter like 2,000 years of not knowing what human nature is, because we have, in Europe at least, Christian teachings governing how we behave. We're not free to behave however we feel, but with the Enlightenment and basically the 1900s, specifically the 1960s, the way humans behave and who we choose to love and who we choose to be with and how we choose to have sex becomes rather more liberal. And almost immediately nightclubs form, and short skirts and boob jobs and OnlyFans and Instagram all follow. This is significant because it shows a certain competition in the dating marketplace to get the best you can. A painful surgery, an annoying diet, some uncomfortable shoes, yes, but it might get you a better partner. In the nightclub culture of the 1990s and the early noughties, you saw intense competitions in nightclubs where guys would all just ask girls out all the time, and mostly we would get told, no, go away, we don't want you. Except for some guys, and those guys, we all knew who they were because we could see them with our own eyes. They were the tall men with a lot of muscle, and they had a lot of money, and they were dominant, and they wore suits, and they drove Mercedes-Benzes, and they had power. It seems 2,000 years of Christianity got us nowhere. That the girls in the nightclubs in the 1990s and the 2000s, they were just the same as the Australopithecus girls a million years ago. They were after the best guy that they could get, and the best guy was the highest testosterone kind of guy. The dominant kind of guy, the guy that had huge social influence and money and power, and the guy that had lots of girlfriends already. Of course, this is all just conjecture. This is just my opinion and some other guys that wrote some gross pickup artist type books. That is until online dating happened. When online dating happened, we had a metric. Every time someone creates an account and every time they see another person and swipe away or connect with them, we can measure it. We can measure what women of a certain age and a certain skin color and a certain background choose to connect with in men. The stats are hard. Women tend to swipe away 19 out of every 20 males they see online. That's a lot. Men, for our part, tend to swipe away about 1 in every 2. The things that women seem to want to find attractive when we do studies in university are things like height and money. You put the same guy in a rich person's uniform, like a suit and tie, you put the exact same guy in a poor person's uniform, whatever that might be, You show that same picture with the same name and the same background to a whole bunch of female university students and ask them, who would you prefer to date? They choose the guy in the suit more times than not. You give women a list of attributes, including financial status. They tend to rate financial status as very high in whom they want to marry or at least be with. You put the same test to men and they seem to find financial attributes very low on women. In fact, all we really care about is age and locality. And when we filter on online dating, the woman lives near us and is of the sort of age we're looking for, which is invariably younger. Then that seems to be all we filter for. And one might say, well, that's unfair for older women. Yes, but every woman spends a decade in her 20s. Not every man spends any time at all as a millionaire. Not every man spends any time at all at 6'3". It seems that all women get 10 years in their 20s and, maybe a few years before that and a few years after that as well, which might be considered the prime years, but not every man is tall, dark, and handsome. You're either going to accept the hypothesis or you're not. I'm going to assume you are if you're still watching. And you might ask the question, so what? What's wrong with it? Why is this bad at all? It is bad, and let me tell you why. So it might be fair to ask, what's the problem with this anyway? The problem is, for millions of years, the sorts of guys that are patient and temperate and low energy and the sort of guys that might not be aggressive and might be prepared to take a back seat haven't been mating. There was a brief period when Christianity was around when they were allowed a wife or afforded one under the arranged marriage rules. But these days, we're straight back to just choosing the hottest guy in the club. And the hottest guy in the club or the hottest guy online is the guy that's the most dominant and the most aggressive, which in and of itself isn't exactly a problem, but in fact, it might well be an advantage. Now that we're out of the food chain, now that we're more worried with issues of social justice than anything else, probably not such an advantage, but for a while it served us well. However, it doesn't serve us well, especially in a climate where we're saying everything's men's fault, that the whole point of the world is that some people are dominant and some people are aggressive and some people are bullying others, when there seems to be a breeding program for a million years to make sure we only ended up with dominant males, and that only those dominant males were able to pass on their genetics and teach the kids how to be a man anyway, and that selection was made by the same gender that's saying there's a patriarchy, everything's men's fault, and if it wasn't for men, everything would be peaceful. It would appear that if it wasn't for females choosing, things might be a hell of a lot more peaceful. So we seem to have, on the one hand, 20% of the male population that gets most of the girls. These guys are the alpha males, the guys that don't really think anything bad is ever going to happen to them. Their names seem to be Chip and Doug, and they go to Ivy League things, and they always succeed and they always fall on their feet. And those guys mightn't understand how the working class live. They might understand exactly how justice is. And they might have a certain opinion that if you can just bully and push and be aggressive your whole way through, then that is the recipe for a good life. And that is how we're all going to succeed. But that seems endless war and competition between us all. However, that behavior does seem to be sexually successful. And given that sex is such a huge motivator for men, it seems to be the right move for a young male to do. Sure, we have endless war, but you'll get laid out of it. Sure, you'll always be in competition with everyone, but you won't experience rejection. I would expect young men to take that deal, and I can't really advise them not to. It's horrible to be celibate. I wouldn't want to be, and I wouldn't wish it upon anyone else. Seems we're doomed to have a 20% of the population that is this alpha male population forever now, and that each successive generation gets more and more and more alpha. Evolution is happening again. The next question seems to be, what are we going to do about, as you might say, the beta males, the guys that just are as they are, the way their mothers and fathers raised them. They're just a good boy who's trying their best to just be normal. It seems that that's unattractive, and that doesn't end up getting girlfriends. It seems that guys like that can't get laid, and they experience a lot of rejection and a lot of hurt. Perhaps if you found yourself in that position, you might see what else you can do, and perhaps that might be something like scheming, or perhaps that might be something that's approximating stalking. That might be something like leaving altogether, or that might be something like seeing females as superior, and that you can just get used and abused and walked over all day long. It doesn't seem a very equitable outcome either, especially from the community that's saying everything is about equity and equality and we need to be fair to everyone. It really seems that some guys are missing out, and sometimes they're missing out because their parents are poor, or they might be the wrong race, which is true if you look into the statistics. Female sexual selection is really racial. It might be because they're short, it might be because they are not able-bodied or something like that. It's a terrible thing to be excluded from dating, and a lot of guys are right now. I would expect them, as I've said, to try and be alphas, but if not, I would expect them to come up with some sort of alternative strategy, and that strategy might not be something that we consider to be moral. The third problem is a problem of what you might call the omega male, or the incel, or the guy that just gives up and thinks that it's just not worth it, or that just can't be done, and loses hope in any sort of relationship whatsoever. That guy might grow up to be, the word misogyny gets used a lot, but that guy might be grown up to be like extremely misogynistic. He might self-harm, he might think it's not worth it and check out. You can imagine how badly this gets. If this video was made 20 years ago, this would be news to you. But a lot of what we've seen in the last 20 years has shown that this group, and I have nothing but sympathy for them, has got a real problem on their hands, and they are having some very negative human effects because of their, as you might say, omega male status. The fourth problem is the problem for women. Women have got themselves in a bad situation where when they find only 1 in every 20 men online dating to be attractive, that's a hell of a lot of competition. Nothing competes like a female trying to date. When all 20 women are going after one guy, why would he choose one? There used to be an expression, why buy the milk when you can get the cow for free? The expression really should be now, why buy the milk when you can get 20 cows for free? And this is what's happening. The guys online just have their, if they're in that top 5%, they just have their pick and they're never going to settle down. And if you choose to compete as a female to try and get that top 20%, you have to be what he wants. He's the market and you're selling it to it, and you know what he wants. It's the sort of stuff you see on Pornhub and OnlyFans. And why wouldn't he? He's a guy after all, and he can get it. If you don't give it to him, someone else will. And if she gives it to him, she gets a foot in the door and you don't. Women are in ruthless competition with each other. They see each other as the enemy. They see each other as competitors, and they're climbing over each other. Even women in their late 30s and early 40s who are long since married with kids seem to want to be getting that Botox and that boob job and that surgery and staying at the gym and then putting their photos on Instagram, out competing sometimes single women who are trying to date. And so not only if you're a single woman, do you have to compete with other single women to try and get that top 5%, you're competing with married women that aren't even in the marketplace. But nevertheless, the guy you're interested in is checking her out because quite frankly, she's smoking hot. The fifth problem is, if you think about it, how will gender equality ever really happen? If males have this enormous incentive to compete with each other, to get money, to get wealth, to get power, to get social influence, we will get money, power, wealth, social influence. However, yes, women are in competition too, but you're in competition for the Instagram likes and the OnlyFans money and something to do with ratios of body parts and box gaps, which are supposed to be big, but that always seems counterintuitive to me. Shouldn't they be small? Anyway, yes, men are in competition, but we're in competition for money and power. And women are in competition with each other too. But they're in competition for body types and certain duck-face looks on the internet. One of those things is going to succeed for its gender, and one of those things will succeed in the short term for its gender, but it's not the sort of thing that gets Nobel Prizes. The last problem of this whole process is what we're talking about is eugenics. It's horrible, it's evil, but this is eugenics. Evolution and eugenics is the same thing. We're talking about selective breeding based on genetics. There will be perhaps some races, certainly some men of some height, and certainly some men with some other genetic traits that simply won't breed from here on here. And that's just unthinkable. It seems to challenge the whole idea of human rights. It seems to make you want to think what's really evil in the world. I mean, every person everywhere, myself included, I admit, agrees that like sexual liberation and being able to choose whom you want to sleep with is a good thing. But when a gender universally chooses only 5% of the male population, what are the other 95% to do? Look, I get it doesn't play out that way because at the end of the day, if you consider men aging into their 40s, everyone eventually gets a wife. But nevertheless, the pressures are there when we were young, that some guys go years without being able to get a girlfriend. And if it's because their genetics are wrong, this is a type of eugenics, and that's scary. So what are we going to do about it? Assuming I'm correct, which I might not be, and I love to be incorrect, so if I am, please let me know in the comment section. But assuming I am correct, first thing we could do about it is just drop the whole woke thing. And that's just not an anti-woke statement. For what it's worth, I've been through university and got a woke degree, and I understand it somewhat. The woke crowd is saying things like, if you give a capital gains tax reduction, then it is a racist act because it benefits one race over another. If you think I'm making that up, I'm not. Ibram X. Kendi said that on a podcast with Ezra Klein. It was literally an example that was given, and he agreed with it. That crowd is saying that if something has a policy, or if some sort of group of some collective of people acts one way and it disaffects another, then it is something ist. Well, this means that women are, racist, classist, ableist. Men are ageist. But like I said, all women spend a decade in their 20s, so maybe not. So if we are going to live with this, I think we're going to have to drop the woke thing for that reason. Otherwise, you're straight back to making women, date more equitably. And when I say date, you know what I mean, right? More equitably, we're not going to do that. That's abhorrent. That's the oldest law. That's so instinctual. We're not overcoming that. So I think we've got to drop the woke thing. Second thing is, seriously, we're just going to have to live with it. We're not making laws in this day and age that says that who you sleep with or who your husband's going to be is going to be judged by a panel of elders or something like that. That's abhorrent. But what we might do is there might be some, over a long period of time, slow, patient, temperate female position on exactly how unbridled hypergamy is hurting them and hurting everyone else. If they agree, they might not. But if they do, they might take some choices themselves to say something about like a social stigma around the girl that wants the footballer guy, or the girl that immediately goes after the rich guy because whatever, and sells herself to be able to get it. And those things have been done before and they're very distasteful. We all know the words. I'm not going to say them, but that might come back around, not as like a girl on girl hate, but we're all going to have to get through this together. The solution is extremely old. You know it. Disney made movies about it. You kiss a frog and it becomes a prince. You never meet a prince. Princes don't marry. If you're a prince, why would you marry? You can have any girl. Why would you get stuck with one when you could have 1,000? But a frog doesn't have many choices. What we might come to understand is that a young man, frog that he is, give him 10 years, he might grow into a prince. So if you're a young female kissing a frog, an unattractive guy, give him 10 years, in his mid-30s, he might be a millionaire. He might go to the gym, he might learn how to get his diet under control, stop drinking with his mates, take some responsibility, read some Jordan Peterson, get his shit together, and he might end up being a prince. However, you would think at that point in time, he'd leave you because he thinks, well, I can do better. So then at that point in time, you're going to have to get rid of the divorce laws. And that's not that bad an idea anyway. Divorce, the stats around how children go when there's a man living in the house that isn't their biological father aren't great. My stats are that they're 50 to 100 times more likely to be murdered, which is a bad one. So I imagine we'll be revisiting divorce laws in the future, not just because of the shocking stat that I just gave, but at some point in time, some lady that kissed the frog and he turned into a prince, she doesn't want him to leave him as soon as he becomes a prince. And I do think that women tend to control these marital laws in our political systems right now. Then we're going to have to start, as a controversial group of people have said in the past, revering the housewife or honoring the mother, or to that female that commits to the guy and doesn't divorce him and change the laws so that now she can't divorce him. And it's so divine. That's wonderful. That really might fix everything and we might find our way back from this. So we're going to have some sort of appreciation for the stay-at-home mum, or at least one might even say long-suffering wife who deals with her husband, even though from her point of view, only 5% of men are attractive. She stays anyway. Men, 50% of women are attractive all the time. Jesus, 100% of them are, let's face it. It's not that big a deal that we stick around. Women are responsible for something like 80% of the divorces. Yeah, but that's totally consistent with the 19 to out of every 20 guys being gross stat that I've already put out there. And there you have it. I don't think men control the world. I think women controlled the world for millions of years. And the result of their experiment was dominant men. I accept that those dominant men then went on and became the Stalins and the Hitlers and maybe the Trumps. But nevertheless, there has been a breeding project for a million years to make males dominant, socially dominant. High testosterone traits like taking risks. That's what we've been bred to do, and you can see it every day. Clearly, that's what we're doing. You don't really need the science. It's evident in front of us. It's why most soldiers are men. It's why most billionaires are men. It's been going on for years and we're stuck with it. There's nothing we can do about it. But can we drop the shit that all there is gender equality until men rose up and dominated everyone? We were chimps, and then at some point in time we split off, and then there was millions of years of females selecting high testosterone males for dating. Thus we have dominant males. But it didn't just fall out of thin air. It wasn't an act of God. It was an act of nature, female nature. I'll leave it there. Controversial perhaps, but I appreciate you watching this far. Hit like if you want. If you don't hit like. If you want to hit subscribe, that'd be good. But if you don't, have your own choices. And leave a comment if you want. Try and make it nice, because the world's better when it's a nice place. Bye everyone. Thanks for listening.